Hi everyone! Now we're going to discuss program design considerations. There are 5 main ones we're going to discuss: exercise mode, training frequency, training intensity, exercise duration, and exercise progression. There are different types of aerobic endurance training programs, and everyone will be a little bit different, and it really depends on what stress you want to impose on the body and what outcome do you want. What adaptations are you trying to acquire? And this will dictate the type of aerobic endurance training program you create. So there's multiple types. They vary in fitness, intensity, and time, and progression parameters. So there's something called block versus undulating training programs, which we'll talk about on the next slide. Each type incorporates the 5 design variables on the previous slide we talked about and have specific programs to accomplish these outcomes. So really, prescription is based on time, so total time of training in minutes and hours, or in distance accumulated over a week, so miles and kilometers. Typically, people go by time to see how long you're going for. And I want to recall the principles of training, which you've learned in previous courses. One is specificity of prescription. The second one is diminishing returns, that as we get more fit, we see less outcomes from all our training. Progressive overload, that we need to progressively overload the stimulus in order to see further adaptations. Individual responses vary, so everyone will respond differently. That is dependent on genetics as well as nurture components, and that the results are transient, such that if you detrain for even 2 weeks, you're going to redo a lot of those adaptations. And that's because it's too metabolically costly to maintain adaptations when you're not using them. So the body gets rid of them. So they're transient changes. You have to maintain things and create enough of a stimulus to maintain it, otherwise you lose it. There are 2 main common types of cardiovascular programming. One is called block programming, and the other one is undulating programming. On the left of the slide is an example of block, where you see block A on the x-axis, block B, and block C, which block A you could be focusing on long, slow distance training just to develop an aerobic base. Block B may change to more muscular endurance training on the bike or in running. And then block C is you're decreasing the volume and you're increasing the intensity. So this would be more like interval-based training. So you do not combine 2 different types or 3 different types of training within these blocks. These are blocks of time of 4 to 6 weeks that are dedicated to one variable, one performance variable, which might be aerobic fitness. It might be high intensity interval training. It might be sprint training, but it's blocks of time set aside to develop that specific outcome. Okay, so this is called block training, when you have blocks of time dedicated to a key performance indicator to train. Undulating programming is an example on the right side. Now you can have weekly undulating training or daily undulating training. Weekly undulating training is when 1 week may be long, slow distance. The next week might be interval training. The next week after that might be muscular endurance training. And then the next week after that might be high intensity interval training. So you're undulating the type of training weekly and or daily. So daily would be, today I'm doing sprints, tomorrow I'm going on a recovery ride, on Wednesday I'm doing a long slow distance, on Thursday I'm doing HIIT, on Friday I'm doing long slow distance. So that would be undulating because you're changing the program focus every single day. This is pretty typical. Undulating programming is typical for an individual who is a general recreational athlete trying to just maintain their cardiovascular fitness and doing a little bit of intensity and a little bit of recovery rides. So block training is specific blocks of time, anywhere up from 4 to 12 weeks of time, that is dedicated to that specific performance indicator. While undulating is weekly undulating when you're training the focus or daily undulating. When I race professionally for cycling, During the off season, I would do more block periodization where I'd have specific blocks of time dedicated to one specific area of fitness. But when I moved towards the season, it was about maintaining all of those key performance indicators. And so I did more of an undulating program to maintain and stay sharp with various system development. As a hockey player, I did more undulating training in the off season as well as in season to try to maintain and work on all the variables of cardiovascular fitness. Now we're going to discuss the different types of endurance-based workouts. We can be like Homer and run for a very long distance very slowly. Or we can go do hill intervals, as we can see here. It's very, very steep. Or we can do tempo runs on the track. All of these are different types of endurance-based workouts, which we're going to discuss on the coming slides. So this slide goes over the different types of aerobic endurance training, their description, and the benefits. You need to be aware of every single type, a little bit about the description, and an overall about the benefits. Okay, so there are 5 different types: long, slow distance, pace and tempo, also known as threshold training or aerobic, anaerobic interval training. We have interval training, we have HIIT, high intensity interval training, and then something called fartlek or speed play, which is Swedish. Fartlek is Swedish, known as speed play. So long, slow distance is training intensities that are approximately 70% of your VO2 peak. And this is a distance that you can basically go all day at. And it's also known as the conversational exercise, where you can hold a conversation comfortably with an individual that you're training with. The goal here is really enhance cardiovascular and thermoregulatory function, improve mitochondrial energy production and oxidation capacity, improve lactate threshold intensity, and changes in metabolic characteristics. Then there's pace, tempo, which is also known as threshold training. And this is when the talk test doesn't work, that you can't actually maintain a conversation with an individual because the intensity is just a little bit uncomfortable. So the intensity is at or slightly higher than race competition intensity. This is usually at your lactate threshold for 20 to 30 minutes. It's tempo intervals, cruise intervals, whatever you want to call this. And the purpose is really to create a stress at a specific intensity and improve energy production from both aerobic and anaerobic metabolism. This is the tempo or the pace that will really increase your lactate threshold and metabolic efficiency. Then there's interval training, exercise at intensities near your VO2 peak. They're usually 3 to 5 minutes in duration, but can be as short as 30 seconds. And the work to rest interval is 1-to-1. Okay, so you do a 5-minute effort, then you have 5 minutes off. Or you do a 3-minute effort and you have 3 minutes off. It's a 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. And this permits the athlete to train at intensities close to their max for a greater amount of time than would be possible in an exercise session at a continuous high intensity. The fourth type is HIIT, so high intensity interval training. And this is when there's repeated high intensity exercise bouts interspersed with brief recovery periods. Typically, it's less than 45 seconds or 2 to 4 minutes of HIIT. The rest interval is pivotal for the quality of the workout. So you go 45 seconds all out and 2 to 4 minutes of rest. Okay. So you can also do 2 to 3 minutes at 90% of your max with 2 minutes rest. The rest is key in order to get you to that high intensity again. Otherwise, if you don't have an appropriate rest, you won't get to the stress that's needed or the stimulus that's needed to stress the system enough to see change. Really, you want to spend several minutes in that workout at greater than 90% of your VO2 max. And this will really be that physiological stress needed to cause change. And then speed play is a combination of all types. So you could be easy running at 70% of VO2 max, combined with some hill work, or short, fast bursts at 85 to 90% for short time periods. I used to do this a lot with in between telephone poles, where one telephone pole I would go easy, and then the next one I would do a sprint, and then easy, then a sprint, and then easy sprint. So this really challenges all systems of the body and may help reduce the boredom and monotony associated with daily training. And so you're just going out and doing a whole bunch of speed play. So you're just alternating different speeds, different intensities, different approaches, different landscapes, etc. So those are the 5 types of cardiovascular endurance training that you need to be aware of. So this is a great summary slide with the basic ranges for training types. So the training type may be long, slow distance, LSD. The frequency per week is 1 to 2 times. The duration is really race distance or longer, so 30 minutes to 120 plus minutes. The intensity is 70% of your VO2 peak or your aerobic threshold. Pace tempo the frequency is 1 to 2 times per week. The duration of the work at pace and tempo at that intensity is 20 to 30 minutes. But you can add on LSD around that to make the workout longer. So the intensity is at your lactate threshold or at slightly above your race pace. The third type we talked about is interval-based training, which is 1 to 2 times per week. It's usually the duration of an interval is 3 to 5 minutes, with the work to rest interval being 1 to 1, and this is close to your VO2 peak. For HIIT, its frequency is 1 time per week, give or take, 30 to 90 seconds of a HIIT, and then the work to rest ratio is 1 to 5. And this is greater than your VO2 peak. And then speed play or fartlek is 1 time per week, approximately 20 to 60 minutes or longer, depending on the sport. And this is where it's variable speed play. So you vary between long, slow distance and pace or tempo based work. So what you have to note is that the frequency and duration vary with training age and training status. That the more trained you are will change how frequent you do these exercises per week and the duration of them and the intensity that you're done at, as well as your training status. So you also have to be mindful of internal and external factors affecting training quality. Heat, altitude, humidity, rain, snow, all of these things impact the external factors affecting training quality, as well as the internal factors if you're fighting a cold, if you didn't get very good sleep, if you're not well fed or you just ate and you're having cramps. All of these factors impact your training quality. Just a few reminders when it comes to cardiovascular training. The training type, so the types we talked about, will determine the fiber type recruited and the potential conversion of fiber types depending on the stress, the primary energy system used, and therefore the adaptation that you're going to see. So remember that shock, that stimulus is needed for further training adaptations, or no shock is needed to maintain acquired benefits. So if you don't have an added shock, but you still have a stimulus, then that will just maintain the acquired benefits. And for some individuals, especially elderly, they just want to maintain the fitness that they currently have. So they don't need a constant progressive overload. Instead, they want to maintain their health benefits that they currently have if they're classified in good health. So on the right, we see a figure with blood lactate concentration on the y-axis, and on the x-axis is work intensity. As work intensity increases, we move from more aerobic metabolism to a combination of aerobic and anaerobic metabolism until you get to the point where blood lactate concentration in the blood starts to accumulate. And once we see that inflection point where blood lactate starts to accumulate quite a bit, that's known as your lactate threshold. And that's usually around 4 millimoles of lactate. So that's the intensity where we start having a backlog of pyruvate, where most of that pyruvate can't all be shuttled to acetyl-CoA for the Krebs cycle. Instead, that pyruvate gets shuttled to lactate, and then that lactate gets dumped into the blood, and we are able to see the accumulation of the lactate, indicating that the muscle has had more hydrogen ion production, which may lead to more. Now let's go over a program design, sample program for a beginner 50K cyclist. And this is a sample of pace and tempo programming. So you can see here, Sunday is a rest day, Monday is a 60-minute long slow distance ride. Tuesday is 30-minute pace tempo ride, where you're doing those pace and tempo intervals. Wednesday, you're doing 45 minutes of speed play. Thursday is 45-minute easy ride, and that means a long, slow distance. Friday would be 30 minutes of pace and tempo, and then Saturday would be a 90-minute long, slow distance ride. To me, this sample, which I took off the internet, is a little bit too much for a beginning cyclist. I would add certainly another rest day in there. You want to ensure that every workout is quality and that you're not just getting a lot of quantity without the sharpness and without the neuromuscular freshness that you need to see changes. So I always add another rest day. I would probably add it on the Thursday to ensure that Friday's pace and tempo ride and Saturday's long slow distance were effective. So note, there's multiple types of endurance rides: long, slow distance, tempo, fartlek. You may need one more day off, like a Thursday. No intervals or hit yet for this individual because they are a beginner. So you're really seeing changes in long, slow distance, tempo, and speed play. So this is a good example that for a beginner, you're not doing hit and you're not doing any max intervals or speed intervals. You're looking at developing the aerobic system first and foremost. Here's another example of a sample interval training program for an intermediate 10-kilometer runner. Again, this is the preseason. So this is preseason, pre-competition season. So Sunday would be a rest day. Monday, 10 reps of half a kilometer intervals at race pace with 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. Tuesday would be 10K easy. Wednesday, 45 minutes of long, slow distance. Doesn't matter about how far you run. Thursday would be HIIT, so 3 minutes at 90% VO2 max with 2 minutes active recovery, and then you repeat that 6 times. Friday is a rest day, and then Saturday would be a 60-minute speed play on a flat course. So this even, you have to read your client. If this is too much for them, or they're getting burnt out, or they haven't ran that much before, or you've classified them too high, they should be classified as a beginner instead of intermediate, you need to draw things back. Okay, so you look at the frequency. Because of the interval runs are stressful, these 2 training days should be spread out during the week to allow recovery between sessions. Duration, remember total distance or duration of the training portion of the session. For example, it's the sum of the interval work bouts. Should approach the competition distances as the athlete becomes more highly trained. And then the intensity or the pace should be close to VO2 max when completing the work bout portions of the interval training sessions. Okay, so all of these things need to be considered: frequency, duration, intensity. If the individual is tired and the quality is not there, incorporate another rest day or change the days in which you have rest day. So instead of having the rest day on the Friday, you could have it on the Wednesday to ensure that Thursday's high intensity interval trainings are going to be really good quality. So what about for a team sport athlete, such as a hockey player, a basketball player, or a soccer player? Well, the conditioning prescription that you prescribe is dependent on the time of the season. So we have the off season, the preseason, the competition season, and the transition period between the competition and starting the off season. And really the goal is build a foundational aerobic base in the off season and preseason and maintain that solid aerobic base during the competition. So for example, when I played hockey competitively, I had during the season, the competitive season, I did 2 lactate threshold or tempo rides per week. And then I would have 1 sprint session. So some people think that you get enough conditioning when you're on the ice and you need to work on strength off the ice. I had the opposite mindset. I did my strength, but the focus was on creating a stimulus off the ice for conditioning, such that when I was on the ice, I focused on skill development and I didn't have to worry about skating hard all the time because I knew my conditioning was really good. I focused on more tactical and technical play and working on skill development. And then I would always have a warm up and cool down for 20 to 30 minutes with light aerobic work. So really, what about for a team sport athlete? Well, it depends on the time of the season. And while you're in season, it depends on how much playing time you get. Will dictate how much cardiovascular training you need to do outside of the sport. So there's lots of different questions to ask. How long do you repeat the program? How long do you need for the length for adaptation? Well, it really depends on the trainability of your athlete, and that's why you retest. You retest regularly, maybe every 2 weeks, every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks to see changes. And once you see good adaptations, then you would change. If you don't see adaptations within a 6-week period, you need to reassess your training prescription. Are you providing enough of a stimulus? Or is your client fatigued and they're not actually adapting and you're decreasing their performance? So, how much time do you have with your client is important. So, do you have 6 weeks only, or do you have 6 months? Do you have 2 years, or is this an endless commitment with your client? Will dictate how you're going to start them on a program and what the end results will be. So, test retest is really important because it tracks progress. The question is, how often? I like to do spot checks every couple weeks and do more of a formal evaluation every 6 weeks. But that's really up to you. You can do weekly spot checks if you want, just to make sure you're on track and you're seeing changes. And then you need to also consider the phase of the training plan. When is the next competition? What is the focus of this training phase right now? And that will help dictate and tell you how long that program can be within that phase. Here's a nice chart that shows the phase of training, the objective of that phase of training, and how frequency, intensity, and time, or frequency, duration, and intensity is affected by the sport season. So in the off season, it's really base training, and the objective is to develop a solid conditioning base. Frequency is 5 to 6 times per week. The duration is long, and it's low to moderate intensity. Preseason, you want to improve factors important to aerobic endurance performance, 6 to 7 times per week. Duration is moderate to long. Intensity is moderate to high. In season, really you want to maintain factors important to aerobic endurance performance specific to the sport. 5 to 6 training sessions per week, and that will include racing. Short training, and it's race distance. Okay, and then the intensity is usually low for training, and it's high intensity for racing. So the focus, obviously, when you're in season is all about the racing, while the training in season is all about supplementing what you're not getting in racing and just ensuring that you're fresh for the race, for the competitions. And then postseason is all about active rest, recovery from the competitive season. The frequency is a lot less, the duration is short, and the intensity is low, and you can do more cross-training then. This concludes week 3's lecture series. Thank you very much for your attention. This week we covered quite a bit of content related to cardiovascular assessments and gap analysis, as well as considerations when we do cardiovascular program design. All right, have a great week.